Thought I'd seen it all before. A world of trouble knocking at my door. But this ain't like nothing.
Welcome to In Crisis, Travel Retail Voices, our podcast series in which we speak to travel retail executives all around the world about how the COVID-19 crisis is affecting their lives and their businesses. Now, in this episode, we hear from James Prescott, Managing Director of Harding, the Flamingo-owned UK-based cruise retail concessionaire that had been flying or sailing so high until recent weeks. And then COVID-19 struck. And as everyone knows, the cruise line sector has been hit with devastating speed, tremendously adverse publicity, and finally, a complete cessation of business. So what does all this spell for a previously thriving company suddenly ground to a standstill? Take a listen as James talks me through the impact and speed and ferocity of the crisis, how he and Harding reacted, and perhaps most importantly, how he sees not a disastrous future for the cruise industry, but a very positive one. And I promise you, it's not a rose-tinted glasses spin, but a deeply considered view of why and how the sector can actually enjoy a very bright future. So James, tell us where you are at the moment. No doubt, like everybody in the UK, you're in lockdown and just trying to cope personally and professionally with an extraordinary situation.
Isn't it just? Good morning, Martin. Certainly is. I'm personally in Brighton at the moment. I think you may be aware, I live in Brighton and commute to Bristol normally during the week to go to Harding up in Bristol there. So it feels bad to say, but actually from a very purely personal kind of home situation, it's no great hardship at the moment because, the sun is shining every day. I can see the sea. I'm back with, family and my son who's at university and interested in Sarah Branquino's piece the other day and her talking about having a sort of unexpected joy of her son coming home. And it's a very similar experience for me. So actually not travelling for a while, having more time with, family and children and a new puppy at home has been no great hardship, and the sun certainly helps.
Yeah, tell us, so how many in your family, James?
4 in total, wife and 2 boys, 15 and 19. 15-year-old is a normal 15-year-old handful, 19-year, and studying from home, so he's doing regular Microsoft Teams schooling from home. So it's a bit of a military operation in the morning at the 6:30 alarm, the 7:30 school start for the 15-year-old. About midday, probably, when the 19-year-old surfaces. He is a university student after all, but
that's right.
And he then sits down till sort of 8 or 9 o'clock doing his study work. My wife looking after the dogs and a new puppy who hasn't quite got the hang of going to the toilets outside. So that's a real joy.
Yeah, well, those are all the wonderful challenges of an enforced, I would say, domesticity, James. But look, you talked about military operations, and I am certain, even without asking you, that you are probably busier than ever, like many of us, simply managing crisis. So tell us what's happened to Harding. I mean, clearly the world's seen what's happened to the cruise sector, along with the whole global travel market, but the cruise sector has been in the headlines so much and for all the wrong reasons. So tell us how it hit your business and how you had to respond.
Well, it has. It really is. The word unprecedented is wildly overused. But I was talking to somebody the other day and saying, can you imagine writing your risk register at the beginning of the year? And normally, any reasonable company would put a risk register together and put the various elements down. But can you imagine a few months ago, because the year is only a few months old, imagine writing down a risk register and putting not just your entire business will come to a standstill, the entire division of an industry you operate in will come to a standstill, the industry will stop, you'll be locked at home, people won't be able to move, you won't be able to access your warehouse. It just is extraordinary. And people have referenced 9/11 and SARS and Ash Cloud, but I really do think this is different. The scale of it, the magnitude of it, the severity of it. And I was reflecting back on September the 11th and the 2008 economic crash and where I was at the time in there. And interesting, in both those times, I just moved companies. So in 1999, I just moved to World Duty Free, so it was all about boom and growth. In 2008-9, I just moved to the Middle East, Arianta, so that was all about boom and growth. Whereas here, it really did come like a wrecking ball from the side. From March the 12th, when the first ship stopped sailing, within 48 hours, it was quite incredible that literally there wasn't a single ship left sailing the seas. And to cope with that was rather extraordinary. And you're right, the working hours have never been so long. I think any and all of us in most companies, I'd say at the moment, are putting in just the most crazy amount of hours. But there's no point crying about it, and there's not too much point stressing about it. You just got to keep working, one step at a time, and working through all the different areas of the business that you're working on. I think because we are in the scheme of global travel retail, we are a relatively small company. We've been growing a lot. So in the last 3 years, we doubled. So I guess, if we finish this year half the size we were during this year, we'd be doing incredibly well. I think most companies at the moment would settle for generating half the business they had. Yeah. But it just has been a rather extraordinary period. We reacted quickly. I think back in January, we could see what was happening in China. We saw a few passengers on a few ships starting to make some rumblings about not wanting to sail. A few itineraries being cancelled on ships that were on the round-the-world voyages and sailing through Asia. So we took some early action. We put a recruitment freeze in place early. We didn't fill a number of gaps and holes that we had in the business early. So I think going into this, on that first 48 hours, we were already, if you like, halfway there in terms of sort of mitigation and planning. And for us, as I've read a lot of the other articles with interest, for us it is all about preservation of cash to ensure that the company, fights its way through to the other side. We're part of the Flamingo Group, so who have similar challenges in India and in the airline operations. But it is one of those cases where, because everybody is in it together, we've been working with some amazingly cooperative and understanding supply partners. The cruise lines have also been very proactive about the measures that they're taking. I was listening again to the Lisa Bauer interview, talking about the people on board the ships and the people in the office, and I concur with all of that. They really have been exceptional and understanding and treating guests first and understanding the concerns of guests, particularly in an industry that seems to have had a lot more kind of negative PR about it than a lot of the others, which I think, a lot of it is unfair, but again, no point licking the wounds. You've got to keep moving forward.
Yes, and we'll talk about that moving forward and how the cruise sector and indeed the cruise retail sector positions itself in the future. But just going back to the key mantra that you mentioned, James, the preserving of cash, critical to all of us, of course, because you're no good to anybody if you run out of cash and the business folds. I guess you've benefited from the UK scheme, the furlough scheme that we've become familiar with, that is in operation around the world. In some cases it's mirrored, but it's been a strong action by the government here. And how have you applied it?
It has, and I think without that furlough scheme, we as well as a lot of other companies would be probably in a very different position in terms of the longevity that we could endure this. And we've got circa 90% of our UK team, and our UK team are about 90% of our head office base. Yeah. And of that 90% of them are furloughed. So we have less than 20 people still working in the UK business at the moment. I think it's a sensible early precaution. We can pull people back from that if necessary. But I do think the government has been really strong on this, and combined with the C-bills, the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, I think will be also very useful. But we need to look at every scheme, avail of whatever we can, and really take advantage of them, because I really don't think it matters how big or small a business you are. I read with interest the burn rate of some of the large cruise lines and some of the larger suppliers. Clearly our burn rate is in a completely different magnitude, but everything is relative to where you started, isn't it? And everything is relative to how quickly and decisively you take action. So I think the benefit of being a smaller company is that we don't have any layers or levels of bureaucracy. Within the wider Flamingo Group, that it is a very entrepreneurially minded and fast-acting fleet-of-foot type operation and type business. So we have been able to move really quickly, get people straight onto furlough, and as I said a minute ago, by not replacing a number of gaps, we'd gone into this, if you like, in a reasonable shape and a reasonable position. So we are, we're set. I hesitate to use the word survive, but I will, as I've said on there, but, this is about survival for every business and making sure that you make it to the other side, because you're no good to your employees, to the industry, to your creditors, etc., if you don't make it. So the primary responsibility and obligation has to be to take all the measures to get to the other side and try and make sure you come out of the other side stronger and having learned a lot.
Yes, I think that's an important point, that a business, in a strange way, can also shine during crisis, even though its operations may be scaled down or in fact stopped. And I think part of that shining process is how a company behaves during such extraordinary times. Talk us through your mantra of talking with your partners, your supplier partners, and your cruise line partners, James.
Well, yeah, communication is a little bit like the location. For us, it's communication. And whether that's with our own people, although we have, as I said a minute ago, 90% of people furloughed, we're still communicating incredibly regularly. We've set up the government also be very proactive around training schemes that people are allowed to do whilst on furlough, but just communication, whether that's with investors, bankers, cruise lines, our own people. I think in this, when I say we're all in it together, none of us, and I really do mean that, it doesn't matter whether you're, Donald Trump or Boris Johnson or anybody else, nobody really knows how this is all going to play out. And that is quite an extraordinary starting point. It's not as if you're trying to find out the facts that somebody else has. Genuinely, all of us are watching, taking the sensible measures that they think they should take, putting a fair degree of hope into there as well, but we just don't know how it's going to play. So you think, well, we all watch the news, we all watch the TV, we all read the papers, so just communicate as much as we know from all of the discussions. And I think being one of those few people still working across the teams, communicating back out with our own people, this is where we're at, this is where the investors, the bankers, the cruise lines, this is where our suppliers are, these are the people who are proactively supporting us, these are the people who are, finding it harder for whatever reason to do so. And I just don't think you can over-communicate in there and keep nothing back. People will fear the unknown. So if everybody is in the same position, there is very much a feeling of, all hold hands, march forward one step at a time, and just make sure that everybody is equally aware of exactly what you're doing, where you're going, how you're trying to do it, and don't keep any secrets. And I think our team have responded very well to that. We have a very regular communication sort of formal process. I say formal, but it's written, an update to the team on a Sunday, which goes out to say, this is what's happened this week, this is where we're at, this is the position, this is what we're doing next week, these are the decisions, that we're wrestling with, we're thinking about them for a bit more. And I think you don't need to have all the answers each week. Sometimes in the updates we're saying, we're trying to decide between A and B, and the following week you explain you've chosen A and this was the reason why. And I think on the whole, we've got those kind of key decisions right. I'm sure with the benefit of hindsight, once we get to the other side of this, there'll be areas that we could have done better. But I think that kind of learning, accepting we're all equally in the dark on this, and it comes down to judgment, doesn't it, at the end of it? And I guess that's why we're all in this in the first place, for, we're in the positions that we're in based on judgment. So you have to apply that as best you can and trust people with the truth and the facts.
Indeed. James, you probably heard the podcast the other day that my colleague Dermot Davitt did with Lisa Bauer. In fact, I think you mentioned it earlier at Starboard. He asked her about the commercial arrangements of the future, the landlord concessionaire relationship, if you will. And you will have read that there's been a great deal of coverage of that subject with relation to the airport sector. What will the concession model look like in the future, or models? Now, this is no doubt quite sensitive, so I won't press you too much, but have you got any thoughts on how a model might change in the future, or if indeed it will change?
Yeah, I don't see how it can't change is the more interesting. I guess obviously I'm not going to comment at the moment about any kind of ongoing discussions. You know, nobody would do that, so I won't embarrass myself by trying to dodge a question. Right. But I just think in the future it can't stay the same, because retailers in travel retail, it's an incredibly lean margin business, and going into this as a lean margin business, when suddenly more than half your business will disappear overnight, companies in the future will be much more risk adverse. And I don't think that matters whether you're us or anyone, a number of bigger competitors in cruise or in the airport industry. All of us have banks and backers and investors who will be much more prudent and risk adverse in the future. I touched on earlier about the risk register. You can imagine in the future, can't you, that on there, when you're looking at decisions about what businesses you invest in, where do you put your stock, and cruise is a very stock-intensive business. It's a very people-intense business, because you have people on ships for months at a time that are quite easy to dial down. It just, the economics, I think, won't be able to be the same going forward, because people will be too risk adverse, and which companies survive and thrive in that, I guess time will tell. But I just think we all will have to have a bit of a deep breath and a rethink of how it works. I also did read with interest the comments from my old boss, Jack McGowan, on your article the other day, talking about, in this scenario, and to a degree, that airport authorities can't afford to care, that regardless of what the commercials are or how much they like the people, the great job they've done, when all is said and done, we're all employed to make money for our companies. And, I thought that was interesting and very honest from Jack's perspective of things. So I think there needs to be a bit of an irrational logic in there, which says, everybody needs to make the most they possibly can. And as long as you've got one retailer prepared to offer a crazy amount of money, whoever the landlord is, airport, airline, cruise line, etc., they'll take that money. So I think as retailers all need to look each other in the eye and have a bit of a think about, are they really doing things in the best interests of the industry and all of us for the long term? And maybe we've all been a bit too short term in the past.
Yes, well, that's a very telling comment. And Jack's reference was brutally Darwinist, wasn't it, in terms of the survival of the fittest. I wonder, having spoken to a number of airports over recent days who have given me really positive feedback about the Trinity initiative we're doing, I wonder, in fact, that how many will actually be quite that brutal in their thinking. Speaking to one of the really blue chip airports of the world this week, a senior executive said to me, we want quality retail partners in the future. And if your point is right, and I think it is, James, that no quality retailer will be able to take the risk and offer, let's say, the excessive bids of the past, then there is a real danger that if a more equitable model is not struck, that we don't get quality retailers. We get a very different kind of operator entering the business, and that could roll back the clock in this sector 20 or 30 years, which would be very bad. So let's hope you're right, and let's hope there's an enlightened view from all sides to striking, a better balance of risk and reward, a more sustainable, equitable model. Which brings us nicely on, I think, James, to the cruise sector of the future. Now, of course, the prophets of doom have been out in great numbers, but if one looks at some of the more far-sighted views, some of the more far-sighted articles that have been published recently, the cruise sector will bounce back. It may take some time. It's taken a battering. Its public image has been hurt, but it will come back. People will want to take memorable journeys at sea, and I'm sure you see it that way. How do you see the sector positioning itself, kind of shorter term and longer term? What will it need to change? And do you think your part of the cruise business will change as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I think, if you look, again, parochially at the Harding business, we have a very diverse portfolio of cruise line partners, and geographically we're very diverse. So I guess in some ways our balance of risk is nicely spread. In other ways, I guess, you have a number of operations in different parts of the world, and therefore you have a number of sort of hurdles to jump. I think the actions that the cruise lines so far have been taking are incredibly impressive, talking about very much a proactive managed social distancing, perhaps removing buffets on board, so that people are seated, making the gaps a bit wider between them, the ability of testing everybody as they go on board, putting medical grade filtration into the rooms. There was an interesting article, also I believe on your site, about possibly on Genting, who have put in HEPA grade filtration into all the rooms. It's all outside air conditioning, no recycled air, full testing on board of all of the crew, putting crew into single occupancy cabins, no sharing. So I think people will want to take a holiday in the future, and if you were looking where you were going to go on holiday or what you were going to do and how you were going to do it, where could you better manage social distancing on a plane or on a cruise ship? And you think, well, actually, even if some of the planes, as been mentioned, don't fill that middle seat, you're still in very close proximity to people, whereas on a ship you can have, by managed occupancy levels and managed events on board, you can have very good and proactive social distancing. You have all of the medical facilities already on there. A lot of discussion around the ports having enhanced medical facilities. So I think a lot of it comes down to how quickly those things can be put in place, the PR message around them, how quickly that 5-10 minute testing can be done, as was mentioned, that's happening in Dubai now on a smaller scale. But if those kind of things can be ramped up, then you could almost say, well, where is there better to go than on a cruise ship? Because you can keep your distance, you can go to the sunshine, you can have a memorable journey, you've got all the care and attention that's needed, and arguably, unless we're all going to stay locked at home for the next 12 or 18 months until there is a vaccine, we're going to want to go out, and people, unless the economies are completely destroyed, people are going to want to go on holiday. And I do think that the cruise industry is well positioned to be able to do that. And a lot of it will be about the PR and the messaging around it and the reassurance messages, and less about, I think I agree also with what Lisa was saying, that it will be less about price as people come back and more about the reassurance that they have that it's a safe thing to do. And cruisers, those traditional hardened cruisers, are a very determined bunch. They will not easily be scared off going back on cruises. And there were over 100 new cruise ships being built. It was an unprecedented time for the amount of tonnage and berth that were coming onto the market. So I think the potential is there. It will clearly just take a bit of time to ramp back up again. And I think I've seen every scenario from wildly pessimistic to wildly optimistic in the last few days, which brings me back to my earlier point. I think people at the moment just don't know. So I think there'll be some cautious returning at the beginning. But even if some ports are closed, actually the cruise ships themselves have incredible entertainment on board. So almost, if you've been tested going on board and you're certain that everybody on that ship is safe and clear, where is there better to possibly be? You can just stay on the ship, get some fantastic food, entertainment, enjoy yourself, have a great, safe holiday, come back home, jump in your car and drive home. So I think the nature of it will change in the shorter term. There'll be less flying to destinations, there'll be more driving, which, the US operations going from Miami down to the Caribbean, etc. You could see those coming back very quickly. Some of the European med season with pinging through half a dozen or more ports may be more of a challenge until those ports open up. So I think the short term versus mid-term will look rather different. Mid-term, I think the opportunity or the outlook for the industry is still incredibly positive. The cruise lines are in a great position. You will have seen all of the financing that they've been going through over the last couple of weeks, and they pretty universally seem to be in a very strong position. So as an eternal optimist, I guess I remain optimistic that it will come back. It will just take a little longer, perhaps, than any of us would have liked to come back.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, optimistic, yes, but reasoned optimism, and I think you're right. And that serious investment that's been pouring into the sector from some pretty heavy hitters seems to suggest that others share your view. It's interesting, James. I was talking to Eugene Barry at Dubai International Airport. He's a really far-sighted airport executive, and he was talking in similar terms to you about how the operator of the airport, just like the cruise company itself, will have to espouse some other values of well-being, of safety, of welcoming passengers, of caring for them as much as the operational and the commercial. And the medical, of course, will play a role within that. So I think that's going to be mirrored across the sector. James, just to kind of draw things to a conclusion, crisis brings out many things in people, doesn't it? And I'm sure you have seen lots of good, and you see some things that probably are not so good. Tell us what your experience have been of dealing with partners, with suppliers, with all walks of life, really.
That is an interesting one. This is the most extreme, hopefully, that any of us will ever face, personally or professionally. And it really does bring out, I think, the true character of people and companies. And on the whole, I think people have really risen to the challenge. That feeling of solidarity, that we're in it together and everybody sort of joining hands and trying to work through practical solutions, has been incredible. I've been, I guess, incredibly disappointed, thankfully not in equal measure, but by how some people almost seem to have their head in the sand and they just want their issue resolved now, and they'll, phone and email and scream about something. And you're saying, well, just give us 24 hours to work through this. We've got 90% of people off. We're working through it. We'll deal with it. We'll deal with it personally. And some people and companies who have just been absolutely unreasonable about it. Thankfully, they're in the absolute minority. I'd say, single percentage numbers. On the whole, most people have been incredibly pragmatic, sensible, and I think that personal touch has definitely brought out, the best in people, and almost by taking away some of that business formality. I think this use of Zoom and Microsoft Teams, and you're seeing into people's homes and you're seeing people a bit more relaxed. I think the removal of some of that business formality that's there before will hopefully be a good and sustained thing, and the human element, we're all finding out a bit more about each other across the industry and through your podcasts, where people are in their families and the things they're going through. I really do hope that that's not in 12 or 24 months' time. We look back and it's all forgotten and everybody goes back to the usual kind of slightly adversarial way of working. And if we can keep a good bit of that in an industry that was already a people-based, people-focused, people supporting each other industry, which I guess is why so many of us stay in it for so long, that will be a real positive to have come from it. And the learnings from have to work more at speed and more efficiently, and the ruthless prioritisation of what's really important and value-adding and what isn't. If we can learn from that, the companies that make it to the other side and the people that make it to the other side, hopefully puts the industry in a better position for the next 10, 15, 20 years, not just, the next sort of 6 to 12 months that we're all facing at the moment.
Indeed. Well, you said earlier, James, that this was all about survival, getting to the other side. Everything I've heard from you today tells me you will most certainly get to the other side, and I would join everybody who will be listening to this podcast in wishing you and all the team at Harding well. I hope they're all safe and well, firstly, around the world, that your business bounces back just as quickly as it can, that you, James, like me, a bit of a veteran in the industry, although you're a fair bit younger than me. Stay safe and well with your family too. It's been really good of you to take all this time this morning, and I thank you for your time and wish you well.
Thank you, Martin, and the same to you and all your listeners.
And I swear one day we're gonna put this out behind us, and come what may, we will survive. I think it's safe to say that better times are gonna find us. Hope it won't be long till this trouble is gone.